Good evening, class. Hey, everyone hear me?
Evening.
Good evening. Welcome to good evening. Welcome to week 4 of our journey together. I'm going down the attendance list currently. Looks like about half of us are here. Okay, so let me get the PowerPoint in place and we'll get started. Let's see. All right, you should be able to see the screen at this point.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, welcome. This week we're going to do some additional discussion of the process that we go through for strategic planning purposes, and we're going to do some discussion relative to the transition from last week of vision, mission, and guiding principles and values into the gap analysis and the whole application of determining performance and and desire for future performance. So when we talk about a gap or a gap assessment, it's a pretty simplistic approach, but basically we're looking at what's the vision or the future state in the case of your case studies for the organization and where they are currently. And so in a strategic analysis rather than your projects, this would be the evaluation that the organization, the management team, and the middle management team would go through once the strategic plan was designed, and they would want to look at where the company currently is, its current state, and where the company desires to be based on the vision statement that they've developed. And the physical differences between those two states of the organization are what we think of as the gap or the gap analysis. In the case of your business cases that you're doing for your projects, that same logic applies. The difference being that your future state assessment that you've developed for the purposes of your project is, in a sense, it's the team's original concept of or view for the future based on what you were hoping to be able to achieve as it relates to your project. Pardon me. So while they come from two different perspectives, the logic works in both regards. So when we use the word vision here in your projects, that would be your future state assessment. And because you're not dealing with, in most cases, dealing with the entire organizational view, that's the difference. Where in the case of a strategic vision or a strategic plan, we're looking at the total performance of the entire organization, and that's why we define that as being a vision. And we talked about that whole philosophy last week. So what we focus on then is what do we need to do to close this gap? And what philosophy and methodology can we follow to do that? So in doing so, we as a team of managers or the organization, and you would do this, you probably followed the same protocol when you were looking at your project as a project team for your BBP. You sit down with those two conditions and with that defined difference between the two, and you want to do an analysis to try and figure out exactly what that consists of. So we would ask ourselves questions like, in a balanced scorecard approach, what must we do to in the key areas of a balanced scorecard to close that gap? And if you may remember, in a balanced scorecard, there are 4 major segments that we measure and evaluate. The first being financial, and that's going to be the indicators and the elements of your balanced scorecard that relate to financial performance. So in a gap analysis for a strategic plan, those numbers might be creating the appropriate revenue to be able to cost justify the investments that you're going to make in the company to close that gap. This could be technology, new equipment, new personnel, new capabilities, whatever, expansion of current capabilities. All of that would fall into a financial assessment. And if you're using a balanced scorecard approach, that would be some of the areas that you would look at. The other part is what we call the customer or market segment. So again, trying to close that gap. What are those elements that relate to your marketplace that are going to be necessary for you to address to make the company successful at achieving their closing of the gap? That could be questions such as what new markets do we need to enter for the purposes of taking growing in the area that we've chosen as our strategic direction? What customers are in that segment or could be in that segment? What are the needs and desires of the companies in that regard? And what are they looking for from vendors? When you're doing a strategic assessment, one of the things you try to do is look for those things that are going to make your company unique and give you competitive advantage. Uh, it's rare that simply because you develop a strategic plan that you're going to be able to enter in a new market against new competitors or existing competitors with a Me Too strategy. The only time that Me Too strategy is going to be very effective is going to be if you're in a marketplace where there's not sufficient supply. And so therefore, customers are looking for people to add an increased volume of supply. Then you may be able to get away with a Me Too type of philosophy. But normally, that's not the issue. So for a new person to enter into a new marketplace, a new vendor, dealing with new customers, those customers are looking for something more than what is already available in the marketplace. They're looking for a competitive reason why they should deal with a new supplier. So in your strategic analysis, the questions in your gap that you're going to look at is what is it you can do as an organization that's going to give you that competitive advantage to be able to enter that marketplace and have the expectation that the customers are going to embrace your entry and support your entry. Another of the third area in that balanced scorecard approach would be to analyze what the operational needs are of your organization to close that gap. And this could be technology, it could be process, structure, it could be a new facility in a certain geographic location, but it's going to be the operational elements of your business or your services that you provide that you need to expand or improve to be able to close that gap. And so operational objectives might be an area that you would want to research as a project team. And then your workforce. And the workforce area of the balanced scorecard is those elements that involve your people, your workforce. And these can be things such as how do you create an innovative and dynamic culture that instills change and instills growth? What kind of training do you need to do to close the personnel characteristics and skills gap between yourself and the marketplace? What new types of people and skill sets do you need to bring in to the organization to be sure that you're going to close this gap? So in a initial balanced scorecard of approach, you as a management team, once you've developed that strategy and you've identified that gap, you'd want to evaluate that gap, analyzing it with these types of factors. Another approach would be to use a Baldrige approach. And there's not to say you couldn't use both, but I mean, usually companies are using one and the other. In the Baldrige, we look at a number of other areas that may need to be analyzed to be able to figure out how to close that gap. And some of those areas are leadership. So for example, when you look at that gap and you look at what you're trying to do as a company, does the company possess the leadership skills that are necessary internally to achieve that growth factor that you need in the gap improvement? So for example, if your gap analysis shows that one of the areas you need to improve in is real-time IT technology skill sets that allow customers to go online and look at their existing orders and real time see the status of their orders within your process, or the ability to place orders instantaneously against directly to the production line of your company. If those are skill sets that that your gap analysis shows are required by or needed by the marketplace, then you would look at your leadership style and your leadership group, and you would decide, do we have the internal resources that would allow us to develop those type of services? So if your IT department, for example, was antiquated and did not have that kind of skill set, it didn't have a mainframe or a real-time accessibility to the marketplace through the World Wide Web, then you might need to go out looking for leadership skills that of individuals that have that skill set. You might evaluate that kind of a need and say, we have a good person, they just don't have the skills. It's cheaper and quicker for us to help them to acquire those skills through education, through courses, whatever, through consultants, than it is to go hire a new person and terminate people that are already in place or expand the department. So again, you look at your situation and you look at your skill sets of your leadership and you define that. Now, and in the case of Baldridge, when they say leadership, they're talking about anybody that's in your management slant leadership infrastructure. So that could be anything from a floor supervisor all the way up through the CEO. So it's anyone and everyone that has a leadership responsibility. Strategic planning is another area that Baldridge looks at, and there becomes, does the company have the skill sets now that we've done a strategic analysis? Do they have the skill sets to be able to implement, to plan, to create an integration and implementation plan, and then to carry it out and succeed? If not, then you might have to look for ways to bring that skill set in-house. But strategic planning and the implementation of a strategic plan are skill sets that Baldridge would have you look at when you're looking at your gap analysis. There is a significant difference in the skill set between the individuals that develop a strategic plan and the individuals that actually implement and carry it out. They don't necessarily have the same skill sets, and not necessarily everybody that does one is capable of doing both. Again, similar to the balanced scorecard, our customer voice and the importance of the marketplace as it impacts both internally and externally to our organization is a critical element that needs to be evaluated and needs to be measured against this gap area. So again, here it's the Baldridge talks a lot about the customer voice. Are you listening to the customer? If you're planning to grow into new markets and expand your company, are you listening to the people that are in those marketplaces to ensure that your plan is meeting the needs of the marketplace? What strategic planning calls for is for your actions to be meeting the needs of the customer and the marketplace, not trying to force the marketplace to accept the needs and voice of the company. And there is a distinct difference. And in years past, especially back when we had monopolies like Ma Bell and so forth, and IBMs and so forth, those companies believed that the marketplace existed for their sake, and you were to change for what they could do rather than them changing for what the marketplace wanted. So Baldridge emphasizes the need, when we're doing these types of analysis, to focus on the needs of our customer voice. Information and knowledge management is one of the 7 Baldridge areas, and this is your IT and your statistical analysis and your quantitative measuring capabilities that you develop with as a company to know more about yourself and how you're progressing. And this would be an area that, again, we would want to look at in the gap analysis to make sure that as we change and grow the company, that we're also growing our capabilities to share and visualize the intellectual development that we're going to carry out. As with the workforce up here, human resources, another Baldridge area, and Baldridge looks at internal development as well as training, the development of your subordinates, helping your subordinates to grow with the company rather than simply bringing people in from the outside. But you need to look at that and decide how, in fact, you're going to do that, and whether or not the strategic plan is going to require human resource uh, additions to the company, and if so, how you're going to pay for that. Again, we go into the similar up here, operational. Here we're talking about process management, supply management, uh, 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 shipping management, new product design management, day-to-day operations management, all of the different elements of the production of your product or service. Uh, those elements, there's going to be gaps in that between what you currently are capable of doing and what you need to do. And you have to identify those and identify what it is you need to gain and quantify it. You can't just simply say we need to be better at what we're doing or we need to reduce our quality numbers by 25%. That's not what they're talking about. Here we're talking about the parts of operations that does not currently exist that you need to expand, achieve, or acquire to be able to close that current state, future state gap analysis. Okay, let me just go back to that slide for a second. Let's just stop for a second. I've put out a lot of words and terminology. Any comments or questions relating to these two different approaches or mindsets as far as how you, as a team or as a management team or as a project team, would look at trying to close that gap between your current state and future state? And do any of you are you currently working someplace where your employer actually is attempting to do this? I'm assuming everybody's still there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead.
In my section, I know my boss is trying to close the gap, do the gap analysis in our resources processes mainly,
Mm-hmm.
and in the way we operate. We've seen some mainly when our analysts are working, they tend to overstep or step on each other's toes. Nothing is quite it's not delineated as much as needed, so everybody will know where the lines in the sense, the line of efforts need to concentrate on,
Mm-hmm.
or where everybody needs to post the key task and responsibilities of each person. So right now, that's what we're working on through a working group. Try to see how we can operate better and make sure we streamline our processes.
Are they doing that through just brainstorming, or are they doing mini projects to go out and try and define how you're physically doing it versus what you need to do, or how are they trying to assess that?
At this stage, sir, we started about 3 weeks ago. We're still brainstorming and going through listing out all of the tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Who's actually tasked to do it as of now and how it should look. And the question that we're trying to answer, so who's doing what and should they be doing it?
Right.
And so to find out who exactly needs to be doing that specific task. So we would, because we have a lot of information overflow that bogs us down, so we need to make sure that all the tasks are aligned.
Mm-hmm.
And so we won't be having that information overflow. And
Excellent. And you mentioned one of the parts that I especially am sensitive to, and that's figuring out what you're doing, why you're doing it, and should you be doing it.
yes, sir.
Because what I have historically found with many years in the marketplace, and it depends on where you're at, but at a minimum, I would say 10%, and at a norm, about 25% of the things that when I do this and investigate this, I find that anywhere from 10 to 25% of what we do is unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's lost opportunity. It's expense and it's lost man hours. Give you all a great example. 10 years ago, or actually it's more than that now, it's 30, probably 25 years ago, I worked for a company called American National Can, who was the largest container manufacturer in the United States. And we had been merged between a company called National Can and American Can and became one company. And I was brought in as a non-computer person to take over the IT department because they wanted to have a user engaged rather than just IT geeks doing it all. And my job was to go in and figure out how to streamline the process. And this was before the day of internet, and it was before the time of centralized order entry systems. And so we were the first company that ever developed an intercompany online customer service order entry system. And in the process of doing that, one of the first things I did at the very beginning, and these were running on a mainframe computer system in Chicago that then had dumb terminals all over the world. And so I noticed that we were spending, I had a whole department of over 75 programmers and process people that were doing nothing but creating reports for the different departments, divisions, and geographic locations, computer reports. And at one point, I asked them to print out in 1 month to print out all the reports that we generated and sent out to people either by mail or electronically, and we put them in a parking garage on the ground of a building that we own next door, and it covered a complete floor of the garage. And we then had the managers come over and look at it and see what we had and see how many reports we had. We then determined out of every single report we had where they were going to. We found that nearly 30% of them were going to mailing addresses that no longer existed. We found another 30% that were going to people that no longer work for the company. And of the 40% that were left, we found that over half of those were the same report, just shuffled a different way. We went from producing in the neighborhood of 100,000 reports a year, we went down to generating 15 reports that were redesigned to meet the needs of everyone. We saved over $5 million the first year, just generating reports. And it was because we had created reports year after year after year, and no one ever went back and tried to decide whether you still needed the report, if the report was meeting the needs of anyone else. The reports were showing up at locations, and they were just filing them or throwing them away or burning them. So it's a lot more detailed than that, but that just gives you the background. The point is, we often have elements in our processes that never get re-challenged once they start, and we never challenge whether we need to continue them or if they become obsolete, and we just continue to do them, or we continue to send the information to somebody. And that's one of the things that this kind of gap analysis looks for. They look for that kind of waste so that you try to use that gained time and energy and use it for your new processes. And I'm sorry, I kind of got off tangent, but that happens to be a pet peeve of mine.
Yes, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, so all we're talking about is we've got what we're calling the gap, and what the gap is the capabilities and skill sets and resources that we need that we don't currently either have or we're not utilizing in the fashion we need to utilize them to enable us to reach that future goal, vision, or that future state project in the future. And these are as teams, these are some of the things we should look at. As far as the questions the team should be looking at when they're trying to assess how do we close the gap, they want to look at things like how different is our existing organizational culture from the required one. So one of the things that organizations often fail to do is they look at the analytical and the operational needs, and they don't bother to look at their cultural requirements. So they don't look and say, is the future vision that we have, can it be achieved by the organizational culture that currently exists? And if it can't, or it's not that effective, what do we need to do and what do we need to look like to achieve that objective? So organizational culture and whether or not we need to change the way we look is one question that the team needs to address. What policies, rules, regulations, practices, habits, and protocols must change? That kind of flows with what I was saying a moment ago about all these computer reports. What are the things and what drives the things? If we have work instructions, if we have rules, if we have operational manuals, how often does the company go back and say, has the policy changed? Has the law changed? Are we doing things that we're not required to do any longer? We've now automated our personnel files, so we no longer need to do these practices, these reports that we've been doing. So one of the things that as you're trying to determine how to close the gap is you'll want to look at these type of factors. And one of the reasons on that is that you're trying to ensure that there's not waste, and you want to make sure that the procedures and policies and rules and regulations and protocols that you currently have in effect are going to support the changes you're trying to instill. What processes are in the way? What processes must be redesigned? So are there processes that you have that are going to make it impossible for you to meet that future state? Are there processes that need to be redesigned? And are we willing to set the necessary priorities to get those things done? Is closing the gap technologically feasible? So it's one thing if your leadership says, I want to go to the moon, and I want to be the first civilian company to do so, and to set up a colony on the moon. But then when you do your assessment as a management team, and you look at the things that you can and cannot achieve, you have to ask yourself, is that technological gap feasible? Can we close that gap technically in a realistic manner? If not, it's the job of the management team to raise that issue with leadership and hopefully not lose their job over it. Is closing the gap financially viable? If in the process of doing all this, you determine that your company's going to need over the next 5 years to raise $1 billion in capital, and you're a $100 million company, you might have some questions whether or not the feasibility is there, especially if they're trying to make you do it in a relatively short period of time. So one of the things we look at this stage is what's it going to cost to do what we say we're going to do, and can we realistically achieve that financial need without putting the company at risk? Commonly, the kind of tools we use for this type of questioning and gap analysis is the affinity process, and we're generating the input on the gaps using the sticker system we've talked about before with brainstorming, grouping the stickers into groups again, and then grouping those groups of categories into the goals or the strategy areas that they drive. Because what you want to do is you want to make sure that these things you come up with that you're going to achieve by doing the brainstorming, they need to be grouped into common and like elements so that you can eliminate duplication. But you also need to make sure they actually tie to a goal or a strategic area. You don't want to have a significant element of your project that does not tie to your strategic plan. Otherwise, you're using those resources to achieve activity and goals or objectives that are not consistent with your strategic plan, and so therefore you're going to have resource conflicts. So that's what this bottom bullet is regards to. When it's all said and done, they have to all fall into one of the stated goals and objectives or strategic areas of the strategic plan and not fall outside the scope of the plan. Okay, so those are some of the kind of questions that you would ask, and this would be an effective opportunity for you to use brainstorming to achieve that. So are are there any correlation between this and what you and your teams were doing when you were working on your BBP? It might not be these exact questions, but is this the protocol? Is this the methodology you were following when you were getting your BBP designed? Anyone? Is this the protocol that your teams are following?
Yeah, pretty close.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if you're not, that's fine. I'm not trying to put it out, but I would encourage you to do so if you're not. Go ahead.
The one that kind of stuck out was how different is the existing organizational culture from the required one.
Yes.
And the thing is, we have a lot of diversity in our plant. Not only that in terms of ethnicity, but also in age and skill set. More so in terms of computer knowledge. And so one of the things that kind of, that kind of struck out because Cameron and I had talked about it before, is making it easier for some of our older inspectors to be able to keep up with the technology and making it easier for them to use or to access because a lot of the times it either takes them long or they don't know the information. So we kind of assessed that, but it didn't really stick out to us in this way. So that it's I like seeing this now.
Good. And what you have to deal with there is you've got to decide as an organization, and that's where your values and your ethics principles as a company comes into play. If you've got people that are worth, or if the company feels that it's part of their responsibility to also take care of the people they already have, then part of the strategic gap closing you would look at is how do we develop a training program internally that allows the people who've historically been there for the company, but who are now falling short with computer skills or technology skills, how can we help them to change and mature so that we can keep the people and apply them to the new process and not lose them simply because they don't possess the skill sets that the future needs. And so what I've done historically in the past is I've made it a challenge to the teams to say, do not just assume that you're going to hire new people to perform these new skills. Part of your program needs to be, how do we go about training our existing personnel so that they can achieve those skills? If they choose to leave us because they don't want to do it, that's one thing. But ethically, morally, as a company, we should be striving to have things in place to help our people to achieve the skill sets they need to help the company be successful. And when you do that, you tend to have then a built-in loyalty from the employee because they see that. And they see that you're increasing their value, their worth as well. And then they're willing to help the company to more likely to achieve those objectives. So I commend you for that, being concerned about that. And I tell companies all the time that you can't take the easy way out and just assume you're going to lose the people that can't do it and you're going to hire new people. You need to have a strategy that at least attempts to salvage the people that have been with you through the past. I assume everybody would agree with that logic. Other questions that you would ask as a team, because often the teams are, but is things like, is the company actually committed to closing the gap? We acknowledge there is a gap. We acknowledge there's a future state that we want to be at. Is the company really committed? Is management committed to closing that gap? Or are we just spinning our wheels? Are we willing to make the necessary changes and set the necessary priorities to achieve the gap? What questions are important not only to the organization but to the people so that we keep the people engaged in the process? And are we dreaming about the future with a responsible attitude of what the future holds? Or are we doing a pipe dream? All of these are the types of things that the implementation team needs to address and understand. because you're going to be the champion for this project going forward. And so you need to feel good that the company actually means what they say. As far as tools that we often use for measuring the progress and the process in GAP, a lot of these are things that you've already seen previously that just to reinforce how we use them. Comparing the current organizational situation or system of problems and the desired future state. One of the most common, and we're going to look at some of these in a moment, are the radar chart is very effectively used for that, and we'll talk about in detail about that. The interrelationship diagram, a tree diagram, and the Pareto charts are four key tools that we use quite a bit in gap analysis. In the benchmarking course, which you all have not had benchmarking yet, correct?
Not yet.
Correct.
Okay, you'll cover these in more detail in benchmarking, and benchmarking uses these quite effectively. And benchmarking is one of the business approaches we use to try and help the company to close the gap and identify the necessary actions and best practices to be able to improve and close the performance gap. I'll leave that for that course, and I won't steal their thunder this evening, but just so you know that. So radar charts.
I had a quick question, Professor.
Yes, go ahead.
Have you had experience, or what are your thoughts in the use of maturity charts?
Yeah, I've liked them. One of the biggest issues that people have with them is it takes a little bit of training to understand how to read them and how to relate to them. Have you found that the case? Did your company use them?
We use them, however, we haven't. Not everybody gets exposed to them.
Right.
I've seen several different charts, and I can understand when you say that it's hard to read them.
Yes.
Or even how to equivalate them, how to calculate the actual points.
Right.
I just wanted to ask in case you've ever used that.
I've seen them. I personally have not used them, but I've seen companies as a consultant that did use them. One of the concerns I have with them is if the average employee can't look at them and understand them, then I'm afraid that it sometimes makes people think it's just gobbledygook. And then the other part is that they're not that easily understood as far as where the numbers came from. And so for an analytic geek, it's a great process. It works well. It does what it's designed to do. But for the average employee, I'm just concerned it might be a little bit too analytical. It would be my assessment of it. I've not seen them used in manufacturing companies as much as I've seen them used in research companies. Does that help at all?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's just look at some of these. So one of the reasons, and I happen to be a strong proponent of radar charts myself, one of the reasons radar charts work so well for this type of a topic is it's one of the few charts that you can put a lot of data on one single chart, and it's relatively easy to read, and it shows relativity very easily. So, for example, because quite often you can only put so much data on a chart. But if you take a radar chart, which it gets its name from those of us that have been in the military, it looks like the screen of a radar screen, especially in the Navy. At sea, this is what our radar charts look like as far as these lines and this shape. So that's where the words come from. But what a radar chart does is it allows you, and you can. In this particular case, there's 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 factors. You could have 10 or 12. It only gets cumbersome as it gets bigger and has more of them because of the sheer data on the screen. But what this allows you to do is look at, in this case, 6 specific indicators that the company is tracking, and allow you to put multiple periods on the same chart and see see changes occur relatively easily. So for example, this yellow line is 2013. We don't have the source information, but we're just going to assume that they're doing some kind of an analysis every year that evaluates the capabilities of the organization in these areas that are listed. So for example, in leadership, in 2013, whatever tool they were using awarded a score of 2, 0 being the center and 5 being the exterior. In this case, normally what you would expect is that you're trying to achieve a 5, that a perfect score in this case is a 5, and a absolute worst case scenario is a 0. And so here they're saying that in 2013, leadership score for this organization was a 2. 2 years later in 15, they had moved out to a 3. So whatever this scale represents, they've made an improvement of 1/5 of that score in the area of leadership. And you do that, you read that the same way going all the way around these various parameters. There's several things that this type of charting shows, besides just showing the sheer scores that are prevalent in this company. You can see very quickly, based on whatever activity, whatever performance the company activities the company was doing, you can see the areas where they've had the most significant impact on the organizational statistic. So for example, whatever customer means, they've moved from a 2 almost out to a 4.5. And in the area of supplier management, they've moved from a 1 to a 4. So whatever their management activity that's taking place in this organization, these two areas have moved significantly. And in the case of suppliers management, the scores moved in. So it's and again, we don't know the measurements to know whether that's good or bad, but it simply shows that there's been a 2-element change. If, for example, this was measuring supplier management complaints, then this might be good that it's going towards 0. Although normally, like I said, we're normally measuring out on these type of scales. But what's relevant to this chart is that you can very quickly look and see historically what's taken place in these 6 indicators. If this was your company, you would know what these indicators mean and what the measurement means. And so at a glance, you would be able to tell whether this is good or bad, and whether or not the activities are occurring, moving you the right direction. If the goal of this was that I'm trying to move all these elements out to a 5, if that was the intent, then as a manager, I would look at this and say, I'm making acceptable progress in 5 of the 6 indicators, and I've had some type of a setback here in this indicator, and I can arrive at that by the fact that the new year grades are all better than the prior year, if this in fact moving out is the valid measurement. And so therefore I can do a couple of things. I can immediately start to assess the organization to find out why this occurred and whether or not I have a problem in this area. If I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wait a minute, I happen to know that I spent all my money in HR as far as investment for the improvement, and that's where I got the least improvement, then I can ask questions like, what did I get my return on investment? So this this type of a chart, as you can see, can provide a lot of information once you understand what it's physically measured under. And it's irrelevant for our discussion what they are. It's more just simply to show you that there's a lot of data on this screen. It's giving you 6 indicators over 2 years. It's giving you a relative evaluation of between the 2 years, and with a little bit of organizational knowledge, leadership can tell very quickly whether or not their strategies are working effectively in these 6 areas. Do you have any comments about the chart or questions about how the chart works or its effectiveness? Are any of you all using radar charts like this in your organization? I will assume the answer is no and move along. I would encourage you to think about it. Even when I was a supervisor, I used to use this approach to track my department goals and my HR, my people accomplishments. And I used to plot these and put these on the wall in our team work area. And my people really appreciated it because once they understood whether these are supposed to move out or move in, they could very easily tell in a relative sense whether we're making progress or not. And so it was a very effective tool. So and they're easy to make. You can do this you can literally create one of those in 5 minutes in Excel, and Excel has a program that automatically makes radar charts from a data spreadsheet. So I would encourage you to play around with it if you're not familiar with it. This is simply just another example, and this one they've kind of stuck some dollar numbers on it, and they're showing you budget versus actual spending. So, for example, in this case, they're showing you that the budget was, let's say it's millions of dollars, $30 million in spending, and they actually spent 40 million. So if that was a spending scenario, finance would be, and accounting would want to know why sales was in this case $15 million above their budget. And as you go around and you look at the various departments, you look over here, you see development has a budget way out here at 40 million, and they've only spent 15 million. Leadership would be looking at this saying, why is it you're not spending your budget? Why aren't you developing the products you're supposed to be developing? Is there something going on? So at a very quick synopsis, this chart allows you to see those departments that are exceeding their budget and those that are not. And so you would very easily be able to look at this chart, and leadership would be very able to pick up a telephone and start talking to people. Customer support, they're going to say, hey, you're right on budget, good job, keep up the good work. IT, you need to be careful, you're starting to creep to the wrong direction. Admin, sales, and marketing, be in my office Monday morning with an explanation for why you're over budget and how you're going to get back into underspending. And that quickly, this kind of a chart can allow management to make some observations and activity without having to look at reams and reams of computer reports. Any questions on those? Do you see how? Yeah, go ahead. Do you see how effectively you can use something like this? And granted, you could argue that I'm jumping to some conclusions. I'm making the assumptions based on just trying to use this as an example, but very quickly you can tell where your problem children are with this kind of a chart. And granted, with a spreadsheet, you could look and see what the totals are, but what happens is a lot of times data gets lost in spreadsheets and in computer reports. So again, I encourage you to play with these. One of the things that I tell people that are especially new in management is that I use Excel all the time. I mean, I use it constantly. And any of us that have know that Excel has an option in it where you can create a table with your data, and you can go in and you can go through about 15 different graphs, charts, without even changing the material, just by clicking and seeing what comes up as far as graphics. What I have found is that a lot of times things that get lost in the weeds of a spreadsheet can become very telling and very effective when you see them graphically in a chart. And by moving through the Excel spreadsheet and using the different charts, sometimes you'll find a chart that just all of a sudden something jumps out at you that you didn't see in the data until it was put on a chart. This would be one example. Another one is when we're looking at statistical data, and you pull up a chart that it has the various points of process on it, and all of a sudden you notice 2 points that are outside the outliers. and you start saying, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here with these two outliers? You didn't notice them buried in the data, but when you put them on the chart, you see an outlying statistic that doesn't fall in with anything else, and then you could ask questions about why that's doing that. So that's one of the reasons why I encourage people to learn the basics and take, if you haven't ever done it, take an intermediate and an advanced course in Microsoft Excel that you can get them for $50 at most high schools and colleges, and take them and learn how to use those softwares. They can be very powerful, especially with this kind of a presentation. Any comments or questions about that, or disagreement? Okay. This is what we call an interrelation diagram. They're used to clarify interwinding causal relationships of complex problems and situations in order to find an appropriate intervention. So I'm going to show you some additional slides that explain this, but basically an interrelationship diagram is what we use to help us try to find out where root causes and find out where the touch points are that we need to be working on within a process. Has anyone in the class ever seen or used an interrelationship diagram before? Or is this new to all of you?
New to me.
Yep, new to me.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's look at the information, and perhaps you'll find this useful. All right. So an interrelationship diagram process agrees on issues and problem statements. So it's, if you're trying to figure out a problem statement, you have to come with, the group that's looking at has to basically agree what the problem or the issue is, because you need to be able to define it. So you have to agree that there is a problem and what the problem is. Examples: what's the issue around reducing our carbon footprint? So if you were trying to figure that out, if that was your issue, then an example of a problem statement that you would agree as a team is, okay, well, let's figure out what are the issues around reducing a carbon footprint. We would then lay out 5 to 25 issues in circular fashion so the group can focus on them. So what we mean by that is we've agreed that we want to look at carbon footprinting, and we want to understand all the issues that pertain to that. And so as you would brainstorm and come up with all of the different factors or issues that pertain to carbon footprint. That's what these yellow squares are. Forget the lines. These yellow squares that you see in this diagram, each of those represents one of these issues. That's why it says 5 to 25. That's just a random number. It could be any number. But as a team, you're going to brainstorm your problem statement, reducing the carbon footprint, and what are the issues that pertain to that issue. Then start with one issue and ask the questions. You start with one of those yellow squares and say, is there a cause and effect relationship with any other issue? If so, which way is stronger? So, for example, remember there's a circle, and we're going to get to an example in a minute, but you got a circle of 25 yellow squares. You're going to just pick any one of them to start at. You're going to start there and say, is there a cause-effect relationship between this issue and any of the other issues that I have identified on these pink sticky cards? And if there is a relationship, which direction does the relationship go? Does it go from this issue to that issue, or from that issue to this issue? Just remember that. You'll see in a minute what I do with the diagram. Then draw a single-headed arrow in the direction of the strongest influence. So if I'm moving from the yellow square, from the yellow square at the top to the yellow square at the bottom, and I'm saying that the direction of influence is from the bottom up, then I draw a single line up the page with an arrow at the top. You repeat the questions with each and every square around the circle. After finishing the drawings, then you go and you count the arrowheads at each of the incoming and outgoing areas. Again, I'm going to show you this in a second. Okay, so here are the squares that we have on the wall. And if you notice, there's words that are relating, in this particular case, to this example, of all of the things that relate to whatever the topic was that we had here, okay? And this one I think was done for promotion or something like that because you've got poor career progress. Then you've got what they call an in and out. Okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to start with one. Let's say we start here. And we're going to say, okay, of all these circles around, my stupid mouse, of all these circles and these squares around us, are there any relationships that are directly impacted either by or to this element? If, for example, this high turnover was tied to poor career progress, and I was saying the turnover was being caused by poor career progress, then I would draw a line out of high turnover and put it in to poor career progression, or vice versa. And then the arrow is at whatever direction I perceive the influence is. So is the high turnover being caused by poor career progression, or is poor career progression causing high turnover? I would tend to think that this is causing high turnover. So I would draw the line out of here into here and put an arrow at this end. I then would do that between this box and every other box around the circle. And when I finish with this one, I'd move to the next one and I'd do the same thing all the way around. And you move all the way around the circle until you end up with something that looks like this. And you look at it and go, Ferguson's gone mad. He's crazy. It looks like spaghetti, right? First of all, I didn't invent it. I wish I had. I'd be real rich. But anyway, it looks like a spaghetti farm. I agree. But you draw those arrows. If you notice, the arrows go all the way around, and one end of it has an arrow on it. And then what they do, if you remember, I said once they finish this, they go around and they count how many arrows come into this one, and that's 6. How many go out? That's 2. And they go all the way around until they identify that for all of them. And then once they do that, then they can look and see which of these elements has the most ins and which has the most outs. And that's what these green and pink squares are indicating on the numbers. And that then allows you to get to the point where now you're ready to use this diagram. The lines, they drive you crazy. There's computer programs that do this for you. What you're trying to get to is you're trying to identify the relationships between all these various elements and what the influential mapping is. And this is telling you what that is. So then when you move to the next slide, issues with the greatest number of outgoing arrows is normally the root cause. This is the driver and the area usually to track first. So once you complete this exercise, this is one of the ways that you can try to determine what your root cause analysis should be. What are the things in your project that are the root cause? And so once you've finished this map, if you've done it correctly, those that have the most outgoing numbers, which if we go back to the map, outgoing is green in this case. Whoops, it's green. If you notice, there's one that's 9, there's 2 8s, and a 6. All the rest fall off dramatically. So if you were looking for root cause analysis, you would start by looking lacking of planning, vision, and goals, poor organizational structure design, poor dissemination of information, and micromanaging. Those 4 elements are, according to whatever this problem was, retention, whatever, they're the 4 primary causes of root cause for this process. Then, using the same process, using the greater number of incoming arrows, is the outcome. Usually, this area can become an area to measure the overall success of the planning process. So, when you go back to that chart again, now we're talking about the pink. And so, what they're saying is that feeling that puts the team apart, poor career progression, and workers don't trust management are the three elements that they believe if you were to track them, you could readily determine whether or not the plan is overall successful, the improvement you're trying to make. So relationship mapping allows you to attempt to analytically determine what your root cause is and where the areas are that you can most readily measure that will allow you to measure success and see whether or not the plan is getting better. So in a case of our example, if this is all about retention and the way our people are treated and how we retain people on board, then if you're measuring the trust that employees have with their supervisors, the feeling about career progression, and the feeling about that pull the teams apart, if you're able to measure those three elements, then you're able, this system is saying, you're able to determine whether or not this organization is treating their people better and retaining people and keeping their good people on board. And they achieve that by focusing on the green elements in here because those are the primary root cause. That's what an interrelationship diagram does for you. Depending on the complexity of your project will determine whether or not you need to use this level of detail to determine that. But it is a way for you to do it, especially if your team is having trouble assessing what the root cause is. Does that process make sense to you at this point?
Yes, sir.
Is it something you would think about trying to use? You won't hurt my feelings if you don't want to do it. But
I'd give it a shot.
yeah, so it's a tool to put in your. It's what I tell folks is that a lot of the things that you learn in this class and in this program, to me, relates a lot to your grandmother's spice rack, and maybe you all are young enough that your grandmothers didn't do this because modern grandmothers probably don't. But back when I was growing up, my grandmother had a spice rack that was like the size of almost a closet. And it was every spice you could ever think of. And she knew how to play with those things to get certain tastes. If we were having a dinner and the meat she knew was pretty tough and rotten, well, she had a spice to zap it up so we would like it. And a lot of times, she couldn't tell you how much of that she put in her recipe. She knew just by the touch, feel, taste, look of it. And so many of the things that we teach in this program and in this course in particular, I think of as a grandmother spice rack, that we're teaching you lots of various tools that work different ways, that you can use interchangeably, that you can often use two or three in a different fashion, and then the next time it happens, you're going to use two or three others, and you're going to pull those spices and those things out of the rack, and you're going to use them to address issues that you identify in the workplace. So this degree program and the MBA program are designed to basically give you that spice rack so that you're able to handle the problems that come up in a day-to-day work environment using the tools that you've learned so that you're able to apply them in a masterful way. Okay, so that's what we've talked about so far is what takes place in that gap assessment and the need to then move into setting the goals, strategies, and objectives, which is the operational plan of what is going to be how you carry out. So at this point, you've reached the point where pretty much the planning's done, and you're preparing to implement it, to put it to work, to actually accomplish something, and to make the changes. And so we would move into this goal, strategy, and objectives. There are a number of ways that we track that, and that's one of the next diagrams that I wanted to share. And that's what we call a tree diagram or hierarchy. And the picture on the screen is an example of one. And so in this particular case, we're using visions, goals, and objectives and tasks. It gets its name from the fact that it looks like a tree laying on its side. So imagine you've cut the tree down and it's laying on its side. That's the idea of what a tree diagram gets its name from. Tree diagrams are methodologies of tracking and designing data that shows it progressing, usually to finer and finer detail. If you think about a large tree and you've got the trunk at the base, and it's a very large single mass of wood, and that represents the vision that the leadership has for the company. It's the solid foundation on which everything else is built within the strategy of the company, and it's one big massive core of wood. As that shaft moves up the tree, you get into branches, and those branches are usually thinner and smaller than the base of the tree, but they're relatively large, they're strong, and they're the foundation that's really holding up the balance of the tree. That's your goals. Those are the goals that your organization has set for yourselves, and they're based on the vision that leadership has put in place for you. As those branches progress further out in the tree, you get to smaller branches, and that's the objectives that you see here in the picture. So you got your objective 1.1, 1.2, and 2.1. Those are just examples. That could be more or less depending on the plan you have, but those objectives are built off of the goals. And as the further you get to the right, you become more and more operational in nature versus strategic to the left. So as you reach that objective level, now you're taking the goal and you're coming up with the elements that you're going to need to touch. That's going to be your processes. It's going to be the structure that controls the company. It's going to be departments, process, machinery, whatever it is that you're doing as a company. It then goes to the smaller branches, which is the task. And when we get to the task, we're now talking purely at the operational level. And a task is an activity that you're going to carry out for the purposes of achieving an objective. So an objective is a goal, is a subset goal, but a task is an element. It's a strategic versus a strategic versus an objective. I'm sorry, I'm getting my tongue tied. A strategic versus a tactical objective. So a task is a tactic. It's something you're going to carry out. It's a work you're going to perform that's going to lead to accomplishing the objective. And then to the right, you see the action. That's the smallest branches at the top. That's the leaves on the tree where the sunlight converts to energy. And that action is actually the final, it's the root activity that starts the process. When you get to the smallest task that can't be broken down into a smaller task, you then are at the action level. So the action level is the absolute smallest activity broken down to the lowest level you can in the process. So it's work related. It's something you hand to somebody to get done. A lot of words, but that explains this whole mindset of the tree diagram. And in a tree diagram of hierarchical planning, what you're doing is you're taking a very subjective, although quantitative in nature, but subjective vision, and you're moving it to the point where it becomes completely tactical. And at the right-hand side, smallest part of the tree, you've reached the point of absolute tactical application. Does that make sense? Any questions on the concept of what we mean by tree diagram? The way you would use this is how you would plan your project for the purposes of achieving your gap activity analysis. Once you determine the gap you're going to close, this is how you map it out. And a lot of times we use software like Microsoft Project to design these into project outlines so that we're able to actually map tactical activity. Questions? Comments? Make sense? This is one application that is the same for business as it is for the military or the government. We follow the same operational approach, regardless of whether we're doing a business strategic plan or a tactical operational plan for the military. We follow the same protocols, same logic. And then this is just another diagram to show you one that's actually been filled in for a process that I believe came right out of the textbook, actually. And it's basically just showing you how you can literally, and there are software packages that design these for you. A lot of times people just do them longhand or use Excel to do it. But this is an example of an actual activity to get to that first level strategy. So the objective on the left was to improve employee morale, and the goal was 1.5 point improvement of this to scale 10, whatever that scale was. And then as you move to the right, these are the initial actions that are going to take place. Improve employment communication, improve understanding of wage salary administration system, define roles and responsibilities better, and establish regular employee dialogue. So those are the large work areas that are going to be done. That's the first level strategy for the activity. The second level then breaks those down into smaller subsets. Bulletin board. For the case of improving communication, bulletin boards, all hands meetings, and newsletters. So those would be the three things that the organization is going to do to improve employee communication. And then under all hands meetings, you get down into the task, and that they've left it blank, but those would be like in the agenda. What are the elements that you're going to talk about in those meetings? We're going to talk about retention. We're going to talk about overtime. We're going to talk about job selection. We're going to talk about job bidding. We're going to talk about customer future outlook, overtime, Christmas holidays, whatever would be appropriate. And as you can see, it gets more and more finite as you move to the right. Okay, any questions about how these work? These approaches, these models are used for a number of things. They're used to take long-term goals and objectives and to move them toward performance measurements and quantitatively measurable objectives that managers and employees can achieve and track for success. They set goals for the basic customer requirements and the basic customer needs, but they implement them and design it so that the activities, the day-to-day activities of the business can be tied to the successes that you're looking for customer satisfaction. They define exactly what the strategy means at the work level, and so employees know how their work applies specifically to the objectives of the company. And they describe how achieving these goals, what it means to the organization and to the marketplace. So whether you look from left to right or right to left, from your point of view, you can tell specifically what your activity and your strategic intention is and what your activity means to it. And employees can better understand their intended value to the organization and why what they think and do matters and how it ties directly to the stated objectives. The other thing this whole process does is it allows management to understand the impact of their day-to-day activity as it relates to the long-term strategic objectives of the organization. So why does it matter that I'm putting in my staffing reports every Friday at 5 o'clock? Because if you go back to the mapping you've done for this process, they can see exactly how that leads and builds toward whatever success factor has been designed for the organization. Any comments or questions? So I used two terms, and I want to make sure that you understand the difference. We talked about first level strategies versus second level strategies. First level strategies are developed to reach the selected Ashish objectives. They're the stated strategy that ultimately is designed to meet that objective. Once management team has selected the objective and set of appropriate first level strategies, the strategies themselves now become the objective. So that first level strategy ultimately becomes the objective for that goal. The second level strategies must now be developed to achieve the first level strategy. So the first level, as it was in this example, and let's go back, we said we were going to improve employee communications. Well, that's great. And it is believed to be a major element of improving employee morale. So we improve morale by improving our communication with our employees. Neither one tells you how you're going to do that. It doesn't give you the how. That's what level 2 does. Level 2 then this becomes the objective, and the level 2 is the how. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's the activity you're going to carry out that is going to achieve the first level strategy. The process continues until the process gets to the level of tactics, where the strategies are being clearly defined projects. So in our map, the second level strategy continues until it gets down to the point where we have reached the tactic and the action to its lowest level. Because the intent of the second level strategy is to get the objective to a tactical application. When we make the transition from first to second level strategies, we're moving from statistical to tactical process thinking. And when we're at the tactical level, we're talking about, what am I doing today? If I've properly defined this process from the top to the bottom, then if my daily activities, if my tactics that I'm carrying out daily are consistent with what we planned for, then those successful completions should add up to the accomplishment of the first level strategy. Make sense? Or any questions?
Good to go.
Okay. First level, second level, again, major thrust or broad directions. The planning process is not completed until the objective of all the strategies and the tactics are agreed to and thought to be self-consistent by the entire organization. So what they're saying here is, you haven't finished the process until you've gone from first to second, you've gone from objective to strategic to tactical, and the entire organization understands the importance and the connection between the tactical and the strategic direction. Second level strategies developed is done by each of the first level strategic owners with their direct reports and cross-functional work teams. So we take and we determine who, and that's where you were talking earlier about how your company was identifying who is responsible for certain areas. We assign who specifically is responsible for these level 2. And they meet with their teams to come up with the definitions of how to do all of this. So we're constantly, as we move down the organization, we're constantly working to ensure that we're communicating and involving everybody, in this case, direct reports and cross-functional teams, in the process so they understand the importance of their activities. The process uses secondary level strategic development, the same as it was used in the first level. So we're using the same approaches. We're subdividing, assigning specific responsibilities, and then we're brainstorming to determine how we're going to accomplish it and ensuring that the organization understands where they're going and why they're doing what they're doing and the value of it. We talked, we need to understand, as far as in the goals, what are the characteristics of goals? And we talked about goals being at that upper level. The goals are broad statements of desired future state addressing a gap area between current state and future state. So when we use, if I go back far enough, when we're talking about these goals right here, the goals are defined as being, let me get back over there. They are the goals, this went too far. The goals are broad statements of desired future state addressing a gap area between the current and future state. So the goal is an area of concern that management believes they need to address to close that gap. There are limited numbers per year. We don't look at 70 goals per year. Normally, I've seen usually 3 to 5. They say here 4 to 5. Think of it as a Pareto approach to the problem. You can only address so many things at a time. So you're not going to have 30 goals in an effective strategic plan. You're only going to have 3 to 5. And those are the major areas that you need to address to be successful. Usually the champions are assigned to each level. So each of those goals is normally going to have someone assigned to it as being responsible for ensuring the organization addresses that goal. They'll be developed. They're developed by senior leadership. So goals don't come from the bottom up. They normally come from the top down, and they come from the vision. In large organizations, goals may also have 1 to 2 strategies, which define how the organization will achieve the goals in broad terms. And typically, they are cross-functional. Goals normally are not specific to a department or a work center. They're normally cross-functional across the entire organization. And these are just general characteristics that we see in goals. Examples of some strategic goals strategies. A goal might be to improve production delivery times. And then when we start talking and looking at a strategy, the strategy for that goal might be by improving warehouse operations. So we want to improve the delivery time is our goal. The strategy is we're going to focus on the warehouse operations. Another goal example might be improve product quality rates. And the strategy might be by applying Lean Six Sigma approaches to that area. Decrease product costs, another goal. The strategy by improving supplier performance. These are just examples of how you might apply a goal and a strategy. The goal being the larger concept, the strategy being the operational specific approach. Objectives, the characteristics of objectives, describes level of performance expected to be achieved within a particular time frame. What is to be done? The objective is, again, we're now going into tactical. So what is it we're going to do? Who's accountable? Who's the department or the manager? The who doesn't have to necessarily be a name of a person. It can be a job function. It can be a department function. But normally there's a person assigned to it. Criteria for success is specified. This is where we actually get to the point of performance measures and standards. What is it? What is it, and how is it we're going to measure, and how are we going to know that we achieve success? We're going to set a criteria. Multiple objectives may support one goal. So remember, it's a tree. So we can have multiple objectives for one goal. Typical at the process owner level, and tasks are at individual level. So the process is typically going to be the owner of the process, and a task is going to be an individual or a team, like for example a maintenance team or the maintenance department supervisor. It's going to be assigned to a person or a small team. When we talk about in the reading, you're going to be reading about SMART, and what SMART basically is it's a easy way of trying to remember that when we establish these, we try to use a logical approach to what we're doing. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, result-oriented, time-bound. And so when we look at setting these objectives and criteria, we want to try and do it with a SMART format. And then, as you can see the table, they tell you that specific means an objective task must be specific with a single key result, so that you easily know success when you've accomplished it. Measurable, cost, quality, time, so forth. So this is just it's a trick of words to try and help you remember how you're supposed to approach the designing of these. SMART objective example: by the end of 2015, each ABC company department will have a 95% of their employees attend to successfully pass 40 hours professional development training. So that's the SMART objective that they've come up with. The owner is the ABC department directors. The monitor is HR department will report progress and review. So this would be the objective. These are the measurements and the accountability. Just an example of what they mean by a SMART application. And this is kind of a cheat sheet. If somebody wants you to create one, you fill in the blanks using this template, and it will help you to think about how to write one. What is the objective for? By what time frame? When, who, what, how, and why. You fill in the blanks, and it will drive you to write this type of a statement. Catchball. Do you remember from your reading what catchball basically means? And I've got it here on the screen, obviously. If anybody want to hazard a short definition of catchball?
Not sure what that is.
Okay.
And then like if you have an idea or something and it just goes back and forth from lower level to higher level, just going back and forth.
Yes, it's just like playing catch in baseball. You encourage people to pass suggestions and ideas back and forth, to give insights, to give thoughts. As it says here, leaders, managers, personal, two-way communication. You try to create an open discussion forum. You don't call people stupid. You don't throw out ideas just for the fun of it. You try to use both qualitative and quantitative tools. Develop common understanding, develop ownership, make new ideas, identify risk and objectives. So all it really means is that the organization needs to be open, above board, willing to share new ideas. It implies that people at lower levels have the voice that they can throw back data, feedback, objectives, challenges, barriers, and higher levels understand that while they have positional authority, they need to respect and honor the opinions and thoughts of subordinates. It recognizes the importance of management's communication among the organizational levels, but yet respectfully and dynamically allowing all levels of the organization to be part of the dialogue. Okay? You'll read more about that in chapter 9, and I would encourage you to look at that. And it's the whole concept that when you're playing catch, you're throwing the ball back and forth. Well, when you're doing this in brainstorming, basically, you're throwing ideas back and forth, irrespective of position in the company or positional authority. So typically, there are two components to organizational strategic planning. There's the development and the deployment. Much of what we've been talking about this evening has been in the area of deployment. And deployment activity is also what we refer to as the implementation plan. And as you get closer to the completion of your project, in the last course you take in this program, you're going to spend the better part of that course developing and writing your implementation plan for your sponsor and for your project. The implementation task includes developing all of the appropriate levels. So breaking your projects and your activity into the appropriate levels for the company, prioritizing work and resources. No company that I've ever heard of has extra resources. We all have limited resources. So part of the project responsibility is to prioritize your work and identify resources and make recommendations to management on how to use limited resources. Middle management will transition strategically from strategic to operational approach. Establishing project plans for action are done at this point. Conducting reviews, monitors, and control. One of the things that people have the misconception that are not familiar, effectively familiar with project management is that review, control, and monitor does not occur at the end of a project. While it shows up in PMI project as a step in project management, it's really a continuous process that takes place throughout a project. And we review and monitor and control throughout the entire project. But it's important that we capitalize that and identify that in the implementation plan to show where it's taking place, where the touch points are. Tracking results, they need to be tracked as we move through the project, not at the end of the project, but as we move through it so that we can track and ensure that we're achieving the objectives on time and that we're not falling behind. Link performance to goals and objectives. Your implementation plan needs to go down and it also needs to go back up. Anything that you plan to implement, we need to be able to ultimately attach it and identify it back to a goal and objective. And then in communication and engaging stakeholders. At the beginning of a implementation of their projects, you all met with your sponsors and with your sponsor and organization, and you established certain objectives and certain perceptions of what was going to be taking place during the period of your project. Well, the same thing's true when we work in a project within a business. We set certain expectations with management. Part of our responsibility in implementation is to continually be communicating to the sponsors and to the stakeholders where we're at, the gains, the losses, the goods and the bads. There should not be any surprises. There should not be any shocked future events when it comes to stakeholders. And it's our job to communicate that back. And part of the implementation plan is a communication plan that's designed to ensure that stakeholders are kept informed. Those can be anything from written reports to weekly meetings, to gatekeeper meetings, to project updates, to websites, whatever you can think of. All of those get engaged in your implementation plan to ensure that you're communicating with your sponsors. The management of the plan involves identifying the roles of the champions and the teams. So the plan needs to identify who the management hierarchy is. New governances, structures, approaches may be needed to establish cross-functional goals and metric structural organization. So you need to address the team structure and the process of the organization. You're going to use, hopefully, project management techniques to manage the plan, creating charters, which you all did, establishing program and project management approaches. We use PMI-style project management to try and control this process and keep it moving ahead effectively. Establishing schedules and reviews and establishing progress reports so that people are aware of where we're at and what their expectations should be. Establishing performance measurement systems and calibrating success. So in other words, success may change throughout the process of your project. And as that takes place, you may sometimes have to recalibrate what people's expectations are and what the definition of success is. And establishing evaluation and feedback of the plan to all levels of the project to ensure that everyone's aware of the process and what's going on within the process. The planning process that we talk about is a living daily process. The whole purpose of strategic planning is to make it into a day-to-day decision-making and living process. This strategic plan and operational plan should be done in such a way that they help leadership to know how to do their day-to-day work activities and remain balanced to the plan. So they're living documents that allow us to understand how to make our decisions each day in such a way that we ultimately support the project. carving out time for strategic decisions. The plan itself should have built into it points where you get together. We often call those gatekeeping events, where we come together, reevaluate the process, make sure we're on task, and authorize proceeding with the project. And then we try to build tools that encourage strategic thinking and establish training protocols that keep everyone informed and keep senior leadership informed with where the project lies. Okay, now I've thrown a lot of stuff at you in the last few minutes. Here's an example of the kind of communication tools that some organizations develop. So this happens to just simply be something that would go out to an organization on a regular basis, and this one doesn't tell you anything because it's just designed to show you the one way you could do it. And what they're trying to do here is just simply show performance, the U.S. versus best in class, and then what the goal was. And again, it's irrelevant what these things are measuring. All they're trying to show you is that you need to work at ways to communicate success and comparative analysis with your project. Whether or not it's this type of a chart or something else, we find that visual presentations are often more effective than memos and pictorial, or memos or charts. Charts meaning Excel spreadsheets. Okay, let me see where we are. All right. At this point, we've covered what we wanted to cover this evening. Before I move on, I just want to take a breather and ask, does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about this evening? Either how it applies to your project, your workplace, or anything I may have shared that you would like a little bit more information on. Okay, all right. Then we've got a couple things coming up as far as completion of the program. We have one more. We have this week for the general discussion and assignments. Week 5 is our final week together next week. I'm slightly modifying the assignment for week 5, and I'm going to explain that right now. So please pay attention. And if anyone wasn't able to make it this evening, make sure you share with them in your team environment. I'm trying to make it easier than the way they had this set up. So what's going to happen is you have 2 team assignments due for this week. One of them is a PowerPoint presentation that was your assignment number 1 in the course. It's the PowerPoint that you've already submitted. And what we're going to do is in class next week, each team's going to put up their PowerPoint slides that they did for that assignment number 1, and we'll go back and look at the syllabus in a minute to make sure we all know what we mean by assignment number 1. But you're going to share that in class next week, and the team's going to discuss with the class as a whole and just explain what the results you came up with and how you arrived at what you put on the slides for that presentation. Then you've got assignment number 2 that's due currently, that they were asking you to get done to present next week in class as well. I'm not going to make you do that in the class. I'm going to have you just do it as a handout. You're going to sign it. You're going to turn it in as an assignment before the end of the week. That'll give you all of week 5 to get that done. They were trying to cram everything into basically 1 week. So let's go. Okay, so the final assignment that you're going to work on as a team, and is this particular one right here, and this is the one where you're supposed to pick one of these companies, and then you're supposed to just by researching them come up with a basic couple of slides, 2 slides relative to that organization and what you could find. This is the one that I'm saying you can submit at the end of the week, rather than let me get back to the PowerPoint. This second. I'm going to get us into the syllabus because these slides don't look right to me. What I'm trying to do is make this easier for you so you don't have everything due for class. Let's see, syllabus. Okay. See, and they were going to have you make the presentations in class for assignment 1 and 2. What I'm proposing is, if you notice assignment number 2, this one right here, is not, it says it's not due until week 5. Well, they're not really telling you the truth. They want you to have it done so that you can present it in class in week 5. And I just felt that that was putting too much of a burden on you, because you'd have to get these all done and ready this week. So what I'm proposing, if everyone's amenable, is this assignment here, assignment number 1, which you submitted in week 3 as a team. I'm proposing that you will present this in class next week as a team. We'll pull up the slides, and each team will explain to the rest of the class how you developed these and what you came up with, okay? And then I'm proposing that this assignment number 2, that I'm going to give the team until the end of week 5 to complete this portion of the assignment and submit it to me for grade as a team, and we will not do it in class. That will save you having to rush, because what this was going to require you to do was finish your week 4 assignment and get all this done really this week, so that you'd be able to submit it, be ready to present it in class at the beginning of week 5 rather than the end. Does that make sense? Am I confusing anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you will not have to present this one. What you'll do as a team is you will finish this and upload it before midnight Tuesday of week 5, the last week of our class. After our next class lecture, you'll work on this as a team, and you'll provide it as a homework up submission, and then I'll grade it based on that submission. And all you'll have to do for next week is present this one in class. And what we'll do as a class is we'll have a discussion. The grade for the assignment in class next week is the team will be graded based on how well they present this material, and the individuals in the class will be graded based on how well they support the team by asking questions. So you'll be graded based as a presenter and as an audience, because I'll expect everyone to at least ask one intelligent question during the evening when we take the team presentations. Any questions? Other than that and your discussion questions, that's all you have for the balance of this course. You have the discussion questions this week, and as a team getting ready to present this assignment, which you've already done the assignment, you just need to present it. And then between now and the end of week 5, you will develop this and submit it in the homework assignment submission. And then I will grade it. I will need it no later than midnight Tuesday, because your grade's due on Wednesday. And that'd be 2 weeks from yesterday. And then your discussion questions in week 5, and that would be it. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting you the slack and not making you finish that second assignment, number 2, before week 5. I'm going to give you the week 5 to do it. Unless anyone has a doesn't want to do it that way and you want to do the homework sooner. If I have a majority, we'd rather do it earlier, we'll do it earlier. Any votes for that? Is everybody still there?
No, we're good, sir.
Okay.
Your plan sounds good.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is not put the heat on you guys and let you take the time to do it right rather than just rush through it. Okay? Because there is some work. Yes. Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Will the date be changed? Because online it says August 29th.
Is that in the homework location?
Yes, sir. Under the coursework for that team assignment 2, it says it's due August 29th.
Yes, let me go in here right now while we're on. I've got it. I'm calling it up now. And what we're saying is it will be September 5th. Done. Okay. Wait a minute. Now, I just changed it and it went back. Interesting. Hold on. Let me try it again. I'm changing it and it's going back each time. Let's see. September 5th. Save. Oh, I see. You know what? Yeah. Maybe I changed the reading by mistake. That's interesting. Look, that changed them all, didn't it? All right. I've moved it to the 5th. It looks like this changed all of them because this should be still the 30th. All right. Looks like that's team assignment 2, 5th. So what this means is we're not going to have this rehearsal briefing because I'm not going to make you do that early. So I've moved that to the 5th as well. You see what I'm talking about right here? This rehearsal was where they were going to have you rehearse with me so you could present that in class. Since we're not going to present it in class, I've moved it to the 5th because you're not going to, it's not required. It's no longer a requirement. And it doesn't have a grade attached to it anyway. So you won't have to worry about this rehearsal briefing. Okay? But I have changed the team assignment to Tuesday the 5th.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone? Any questions on any of the material we covered this evening? Or any of the material we've covered so far? Okay. Everyone's doing great in the class. I believe we're pretty current on all the assignments. If there's any missing assignments, please get them done. But I think we're pretty current. I appreciate all the hard work, the discussion questions. You've all been very active in there. I think as a whole, you're doing very well, and the quality of your work has been very good. Just keep it up. We've only got 2 weeks left, a week in the course, and I'm sure everyone's going to do fine. I appreciate you not minding this change. I just felt that cramming all this into the 4th week was just asking you to get too much done and not do it effectively. I'd rather you spend the next 2 weeks and do a good job, and then I can still grade that portion of the assignment. So I will look forward to seeing you all in class next Tuesday, and that will be our last live class together. Next Wednesday, and in that you'll be presenting the assignment 1. So the team should be prepared to discuss assignment 1 and explain how they arrived at their information and so forth, and be prepared to answer questions from the students at large. If there are no other questions, you're free to go. I'll stay here to answer any individual questions people may have. I've taken the attendance. We had 2 missing students this evening, it appears. Hopefully they're doing okay. And I'll look forward to seeing you all in class this week.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, sir.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.